Hello, this is Jeff Hopkins. I'm the principal and founder of the Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry, or PSII, or SCI as our students call it, I think happily. The SCI proposal for a new graduation program for BC is what this PowerPoint presentation is about, not just the program, but how it could actually be implemented in BC. And we're proposing a split screen approach. Our proposal for a grad program is just for grades 10 to 12. The reason for that is that the Ministry of Education has already proposed a K-9 curriculum that is currently being circulated and critiqued and commented upon and modified. So we thought it appropriate to focus on grades 10 to 12 for a graduation program. Not because grade 10 to 12 is necessarily or pedagogically the best grouping for a graduation program. It may or may not be, but just for practical reasons to fit into the context of BC. Because, like anything new, this could be threatening to someone who is not ready or someone who just doesn't like change, period. That's one of the reasons why we do propose a split screen implementation approach. What we mean by split screen is that a small group of people in the province would move at a certain rate towards the change, and the larger part of the province would move at a slower rate, still in the same direction, but in more slower and more incremental steps. That way we're all still moving together as a province, but we're allowing people to move in the ways and at the rate that is possible and sort of desirable given their context. This is my incredibly sophisticated diagram showing the idea of the split screen, where a small group of schools in the acceleration zone, and you can see in the red circle with the big red arrow, are moving rapidly towards this newly proposed graduation program, and all schools in BC are moving towards it as well, just at a slower rate. The idea of this is to create a bit of an incubation site or acceleration zone that could be studied by the rest of the province as it moves that direction too. So not only is the pace slower, which is more comfortable, but also there is learning that can take place by watching the schools in the acceleration zone who are probably not testing a pilot style model, but trying out different aspects of the new program in different ways and with different approaches, allowing different schools and districts to learn from those places that are possibly closer to its own context. Recognizing that there are parts of our system that are easier to change and parts of our system that are more difficult to change. The other thing that's important about our proposal, not just the fact that it's a split screen model, but also the model itself, wouldn't necessarily force people to change some of those things like subject-based staffing, block scheduling, grade levels tied to age, some of those things that are really, really hard to change because of systems that are interlocking, sometimes contractual things. Anything that's really, really hard to change because it's just so complex or interwoven with something else doesn't necessarily have to change right away. And on the other side of it, schools who are ready to make changes immediately can do so. The structures that we take away and some of the new structures that we put in place in this proposal would allow people to make change quite a bit more easily. I think it's important to note, though, that even those places that are moving a little more slowly would need to change some things in any case. And those are things that are not so hard to change. They're things that we probably would find most teachers in BC really wanting to change anyway, and in some cases already changing and possibly finding themselves in a frustrating situation where they're using authentic assessment, evaluation, and reporting strategies and finding themselves having to repack those things back into our less than authentic models right now that are most strongly suggested by some ministerial orders and policies at the provincial level. Even though assessment of, for, and as learning are things we've been talking about for decades in BC, probably spent millions on also helping people work towards, and it's something every new teacher is learning about in university, our current system makes it very, very difficult to practice that. So we feel that our new system would allow people to do really good assessment as part of the mainstream, as opposed to feeling like they're swimming against the stream when it comes to when the rubber really hits the road and it's time to turn that assessment into an evaluation and how it's reported on as well. So here's the heart of the model, and what you're looking at right here, it's almost looks too simple to be true, but this is the curriculum. First thing you're probably noticing is it's not very content heavy, and no, it's not. It is a combination of core competencies that you can see up here and universal objectives that you can see over here. And where those things intersect is the curriculum. The model is based on the concept of consilience, or the unity of knowledge, and those intersection points, like this one that you see pointed out here, is where the objectives, these large universal objectives, intersect with core competencies. And this is different from a behavioral outcome model that we've been working within in BC for some time, and even the model that's being proposed for the K-9 right now is still largely behavioral outcome driven, with some recognition of competency development as well. This intersection would form the basis of assessment, and thereby possibly and hopefully what learning is recognized by schools. And this will probably make it easier for people who would like to teach outside of a set of prescriptive behavioral outcomes. They more easily can do so as they're working towards these intersection points instead. If you look at this little chart, you'll see that there's 97 points of intersection. This is actually a lot more than it looks like. It's not as simple as it looks. And these points where they meet suggests content. It also suggests processes, and it also suggests learning activities. In fact, I would say that it suggests more learning activities than our curriculum currently does. It also allows more learning activities than our curriculum currently does, including the opportunity for interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary learning, also disciplinary learning. So that doesn't necessarily change things that make sense to be done in a single discipline. And where you can satisfy the nature of the intersection of the two ideas, you'll see that the opportunities are great for what kinds of things happen as people work towards depth at those points of intersection. It's important to look at this model not as what is not written down, but as what is possible based on what is written down. And I think you'd have a hard time seeing something as impossible based in this model. So as an example of what can happen, let's just take this intersection of these two pieces, for example. So if we take the universal objective, the learner explores the physical universe using a variety of approaches and tools, and ecological literacy. Now, what does this mean? And this is what I think is most interesting about this proposal. So here are some ideas. So some things that might actually happen. And we're doing these in sort of I will or I can or I do statements that would be written from the student's point of view. So I will build a dwelling that's as environmentally compatible with the Vancouver Island ecosystem as possible. I will build an eco-sensitive trail system through a sensitive wilderness area. What is the difference in human perception between traveling by car versus traveling the same route by foot? What is my frame of mind when I'm spending significant time in a natural environment? So you can see there's a variety of things here that are questions, and some of them are statements, and some of them are more like tasks that have been set out. The idea is that, and you can see that some of these things are very hands-on, some of these things are very cerebral or cognitive, some of them are a combination of both, some of them are artistic. They cover many different, potentially cover many different disciplines. They could be math, they could be PE, they could be social studies, they could be construction, they could be done in multiple languages, etc., etc. So you can see how these vary in depth, the time required, how sophisticated they are, the disciplines they're covered, the epistemologies that they're drawing upon, and the formats that they take. PSI's competencies are a lot like everybody else's. We just drew these competency areas from some of the work that had been done here in BC, plus some work that had been done in the Gulf Island School District, also some work that Singapore and Finland have been doing in terms of competency-based curriculum. If you look at our website at learningstorm.org, you'll see that we don't just use competencies and objectives, but we also have that nested inside a set of desired human attributes that we work on first that are a little bit closer to the person. Then we get to the competencies and universal objectives in our curriculum. We think that that's really important because competencies don't necessarily get you to all the things that are important in learning. And the 13 universal learning objectives that we reference are very high level, as I explained before. They're things that would allow for a lot to happen, and they're things that right now you could take our current curriculum and you could easily pour all of the content and processes of our current curriculum into these universal learning outcomes very easily. One thing we haven't been able to fit in very well is our second languages. And this is something that would probably need to be talked about separately. Although it does easily fit into these universal learning outcomes, it may not be strongly enough suggested. And so it would be important to make sure that those things are still valued. I'm sure they always will be, but it may require an actual separate articulation of those things, not necessarily automatically happening in what's listed here. It is important to note, though, things like learner follows scientific process from hypothesis to conclusion, takes in so much information, and there are so many things that could happen over time in an outcome like that, particularly when you see it in the context of each of the competency areas. It's a very, very big container for a lot of learning, just like all of the other 13 are. So why have we proposed a curriculum that has high-level objectives instead of behavioral outcomes? A few reasons. One is that this allows people to create learning activities, and when I say people, I mean teachers and students and even others, hopefully together, teachers and students working together. Co-construction model is a good one, where you can make things that are appropriate to individuals and to specific contexts. Things can change very, very quickly depending on what's going on and who a person actually is who's there before you in your school. It also helps you avoid arguments. As you probably well know, when you talk about what should be included or excluded in a behavioral outcome style content-based curriculum, it's almost impossible to capture all of the things in there that everybody finds important, and one day something changes and all of a sudden your curriculum is obsolete. This stops that from happening. It allows for teachable moments. It allows for creativity, especially on the part of the teacher and the learner. It allows you to construct personalized learning paths, and you don't have to make them conform artificially to predetermined outcomes, or try to quickly create a new course like an independent directed study or a board authorized course in order to do so. It also doesn't suggest or require comparative metrics. This is one about learning. This is about a continuum of learning within a competency area as suggested by objectives. I'd recommend that you look back over some of the last slides and really read what these objectives are and see what they say to you and what they allow. See if there's anything you feel that's really missing, or maybe that's not worded as well as it could be, or something like that. Or do you feel like you could actually do everything you want to do, and maybe things you've always been dying to do in school, and now you could do it much more easily? That's kind of what we found. And then why would you base the assessment model on intersections between those objectives and these competencies rather than just have it done on courses and outcomes like we have right now in BC? There's lots of reasons for that. We think it's important that students recognize connections and interconnectedness of disciplines and concepts across the curriculum. We also think it's important that educators can not have to figure out how to stretch things and stuff things into prepackaged courses. They just have to help people learn things. I think that's what all educators have been dying to do and try to do every day. Sometimes they sort of do it under the, under the radar, but they won't have to do that anymore. They can do it above the radar. It also is interesting that you can look for what's possible instead of looking for what is explicitly written in a curriculum document. This might make it hard for some people who rely on rules to sort of tell them what to do, but in BC we have very well-trained teachers and very intelligent teachers who also have a great deal of autonomy already. I think we should recognize that autonomy and go with it and allow them to be the experts that they are in the subject areas that they're experts in, and beyond those as well. And they are well aware of what needs to be taught in a curriculum. This will free them up to do so. This also frees educators to employ good assessment practices that they can barely use in our current graduation program paradigm. So if you were in a school, or if you were an individual teacher who was not quite ready to organize things differently, this sort of shows you how this model could work very well for a very traditionally organized school, or one that's organized in a really, really new and modern way. So for example, a teacher who's assigned to teach English 11 could still restrict the teaching to the content and processes that are appropriate to that course, but they would assess learning under the objective competency intersections instead. And then a teacher who's working in an interdisciplinary setting could mix the disciplines together very, very easily, work in teams, and introduce concepts that maybe they've never had a chance to introduce, or maybe even never thought of before until they met the actual students that are working with them that particular semester or year. We feel that this program also creates an opportunity for a graduation document or a transcript that goes beyond just a list of numbers with questionable validity. And what I mean by that is, the whole concept that, teacher A is an easy quote unquote teacher and teacher B is a hard quote unquote teacher, teaching the same course, but the marks are driven by what that teacher's like. Inter-rater reliability on assessments, when someone takes something, their readiness, whether or not the assessments were the best that they could be to show someone's learning, etc., etc. This allows for an actual personal learning profile that would follow somebody throughout their 3 years of their graduation program, and that would be backed up by portfolio artifacts that are accessed by going into an interface that looks like the intersection points between the objectives and the competencies. So you wouldn't have to take anybody's word for it that the learning was good. You could actually see evidence of what kinds of things they've done. We know that this is something that both post-secondary education institutes and industry would prefer because we've talked to them and they've told us, but also it would be more trusted as an indicator of what a graduate actually knows how to do, and can offer, instead of a list of marks and courses that sometimes isn't very meaningful. So how would student learning be reported or displayed? What would a report card look like, or do you even need report cards anymore? This is an example of a depth profile in one competency area, and in this case we've chosen ecological literacy. And the way this graph is set up is it's ecological literacy as it relates to each of the objectives that intersect with it. So for example, the first tall blue column is where that ecological literacy competency intersects with scientific process. And in this case, you can see a student has maybe a lot of stuff done in that intersection point. This would just give you a quick idea that, oh, I see some areas where they've done a lot of work and they've worked at a lot of depth, and some areas where they've not worked at a lot of depth. You'll notice there's no numbers here, there's no metrics involved, there's just a visual. This is on purpose, as probably a number is not that necessary in this format. This is just to give a teacher, a student, a parent a very quick idea of where is somebody spending their time and their energy. Are there places where they need to spend more time? Is it okay that there's differences between some very tall columns and some short ones? Maybe even learning a little bit about what a student is really enthusiastic about, and we can help direct them to more things that they'd be enthusiastic about in other areas. And this chart just shows you the opposite way, which is one objective, and in this case the scientific process, as it's demonstrated in connection with each of the competencies. So in this case they're all blue because that's the color we made scientific process. If you remember on the last slide, the column was blue for where scientific process was in ecological literacy. And you'll see here that scientific process as it relates to each of the competency areas, again at different heights, showing you the depth of scientific process as related to those competency contexts. So this is just the reverse of the other slide. Now, if you think of the word profile and you think about what that actually means, it could be a real physical thing, and those bar graphs kind of got us thinking. If you wanted to see a profile of a hand and you use one of these little gadgets with little metal pins in it, and you can see the actual shape of something that is you, the physical you, wouldn't it be interesting if you had something that was complex enough that you could show exactly what someone's learning profile was in a very visual, physical kind of way? And we think you could with this new model. Now, obviously, this is a little bit too complicated to use in any kind of a way where you could, get really, really accurate information about anything in particular. But again, it could give you a quick visual about what a student's done. So this forest of colorful columns shows you where all of the competency areas intersect with all of the high-level learning objectives. And you can see there's tall columns, there's short columns. And if you were to use this on a piece of software where you could turn it around, you could see an actual physical profile of what what depth a student's working at in these areas at these intersection points. And maybe if you wanted to go all the way and be really 3D instead of just pretending to be 3D on a computer, you could really take the card out of a report card and use a 3D printer. This is our 3D printer we have at the school. These are really inexpensive, made in BC, by the way, too. I really recommend it, from Tinkerine Studios. But this little 3D printer could print out an actual profile for you out of plastic material, like kind of like this little owl and this little ball here. And you could actually have a physical printed profile that looked like that pincushiony thing that we saw on the last slide that you could carry with you and show somebody, this is my learning profile. Here's what it looks like right now. And then further to that, inspired by my son, he said, why not just use something free like Minecraft, where you could quickly and easily create a 3D environment. You could make columns that represented the ones that that we saw a couple of slides ago, and in Minecraft you could even write on them, and you could move them around, and you could walk all around them and inside them and look at them, and you could even put your profile right inside here, kind of like a Second Life sort of software environment. But that's just to give you an example that this doesn't have to be very complex, and software already exists that can handle this kind of three-dimensional profile very, very easily without having to spend a lot of money and create something brand new that's just for the education system. Now, these columns are all lovely, but it doesn't give you the kind of information that you really need. When we talked earlier about the idea that you need to know a little bit more information about artifacts that would be evidence that would support a comment someone's making about depth of learning, we need to see a little bit more than that. So we had an idea about creating a simple single interface that would be used by teachers, learners, and parents to allow them to, depending on who they are, either add, edit, retrieve, annotate, or just look up information in real time for a student. And then those would be tied to evidence of learning in their electronic portfolio, where they could put in samples of their work that were demonstrations of their learning. So here's an example of just such an interface. You can see here we have on this side learner objectives, and these are all the high-level objectives that you saw in the earlier slide, and these are the competencies. And in this case, we've used a color code to just to sort of give the idea that you could have colors that would correspond to maybe to different levels of depth. And this would show you with a click of a mouse. Let's pretend this little red arrow in the center is a click of the mouse, and we're looking at the intersection between healthy lifestyle and critical and creative thinking. Behind that blue square that we click on, we might see artifacts that a student has put in. We might also see information that a teacher has written about the artifact that's there, so some assessment language. There might even be a bit of a conversation going on in real time between a teacher and a student about that piece as they're deciding on how it is to be assessed, what's next, what their goals might be, that sort of thing. And also, instead of a report card coming around every few months for a parent, they could look at exactly the same interface and look at any time and see, oh, I see what my child is up to. I see what my teacher has said about their work. I see some evidence of learning, and I can see how it changes from even day to day. I could see how this is changing. This would be such an easy tool to use that it would not be as daunting as what a report card is right now for teachers, especially when they're trying to work with students in a very individual or personalized kind of way. So finally, if this was something that was actually considered for implementation, there's some things that we would obviously need, and this is something that we would need to talk with our Ministry of Education about. We would need the permission for a small number of schools or districts or whoever was ready to do this to be the little red ball hurtling quickly towards the new grad program. They would have to be given an opportunity to meet a different set of graduation requirements. Including assessing, reporting transcripts, how people graduate. In other words, it couldn't be based on courses and marks in courses, and maybe even what exams are written or what kinds of high-level assessments are used. We would need help, again, from the ministry with communicating to parents and students that this is actually okay, and that this is actually the direction that we would like to see the province go in, and that we're trying out this model. We would need help communicating to post-secondary institutes to say, okay, you're going to get this really, really strange-looking transcript, although this strange-looking transcript could be very much like that color-coded interface, and a university or college or whatever it might be, the employer could look at that interface and see exactly how a student has done and what they've done and on what basis certain evaluations have been made. Also, there could be some funding required. Although this is not an expensive process, I do think it would be important, though, that people learn from the acceleration zone, so some funding would be needed to help them share their experience somehow in a meaningful way, through film, through photographs, through other kinds of documentation, probably a combination of those things, so that there could be some real learning going on the part of everyone else in the province as the acceleration zone people are accelerating. That's it for our slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would really encourage your feedback on this. Twitter, you can email us at psii@learningstorm.org. You can tweet about it. Feel free to share this slideshow with other people. Please, though, be careful and don't skim over it, and do not allow people to take pieces of this out of context. This is a complicated bit. Even this slideshow is a little too fast, and it probably requires a good 3-4 hour conversation. But thanks for your attention. I hope you like it. See ya.